Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Grotto in the Tar Pit. In today's day and age, we see a lot of things, and things aren't always the way they seem. In this day and age, you might be dealing with something spiritual, and the world tries to tell you that you're crazy, that you need to deal with, get some mental help or something. But even though you know in your heart and you know in your spirit that something is spiritual, we're gonna touch on a couple of these things today as I talk to our guest today, Nicole Hansen. How you doing today?
Good, thank you.
Good. So, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, that's a really loaded question because I always have to go back to the beginning. I was born into a family of domestic violence, and from an early age, fear was dominant in my life. I can't ever remember a time of not having fear as a constant companion. I was 3 years old and my mom and biological dad separated. When they separated, he stayed in Florida with his family and she moved back to Indiana with her family. And I went with her, but I went to visit with him every summer and every other Christmas. And when I was really young, I always feared him because he was very narcissistic. He was violent. He never physically abused me as far as like hitting me or anything like that. But I had watched him physically attack my mom numerous times, and he was emotionally abusive toward me. But when I was around 7 years old, I visited and I knew right away that something was different. Things were very dark in his life. He had married somebody new, and I really don't know who introduced who, but he was heavily involved in the occult by the time I visited that summer. And I watched him make crystals. I watched him do animal sacrifices. It was very a dark time. And that's
What
also
about the time before that? The time
I'm
before
sorry.
that? Well, yeah, the time before that, before all this happened, were you guys Christians? Did you guys go to church at all, or you just
No.
no? Okay.
No, he was born to a pastor. His dad was a pastor, but he never professed Christianity. He never wanted anything to do with it. My mom wasn't saved at the time either. Um, so he was raised around church. My mom was raised around church, but neither one of them professed Christianity or went to church or had a personal relationship with the Lord at that time. He actually, when my mom left him, he became very angry at God. And he blamed God and told him that it was his fault, that she shouldn't have left. But really, she had taken all she could because he was so violent. And she was young. And when she married him, I think she was only 17. And she had this ideal that because he was a pastor's son, that he would be a really good match, but he just never was. It was just violent from the get-go. And so when they separated, he got worse. And he blamed God. And I think looking back, he hated God. And so I don't know what caused him to fall into the occult and into Satanism and witchcraft. I personally think it was because of the power and control. He loved power and he loved dominating people. And so when I visited that summer, that's one of the first times I can remember being sexually abused by him. And there was a lot of mind control because he would also tell me that he could read my mind and that he knew if I was thinking bad thoughts about him. So even when I went home to my mom, that if I thought bad thoughts about him, that he would kill me and or my mom. And so from a very young age, I can remember just having fear of what am I thinking? What's going on in my mind? Am I thinking bad thoughts? And really trying to just shove down the abuse and shove down the pain and the trauma so that.
So you believed it wholeheartedly that he could
Oh,
read your mind?
absolutely. Because I had watched him do rituals. I had watched him do what looked like powerful things to me. So when he said that he could read my mind, I believed him. I thought that he could. I thought that he had power, and he did to an extent because, the enemy has power, not as powerful as God. But as a child, I didn't know that. I had never really went to church. I was never exposed to spiritual warfare. I didn't understand spiritual warfare. All I knew was that I had a dad that was violent and it was scary. And if I thought bad thoughts about him, he was going to kill me. And I can even remember feeling like I always had eyes on me, like being 8 years old and feeling like I had eyes watching me 24/7. Like I never felt like I was alone, but in a bad way. It's like whenever you have like the hair on the back of your neck standing up and you just feel like someone's in the room with you. I felt like that constantly. And I felt like that he was always invading my thought processes and that I was never even alone in my mind. So I started acting out at a young age. I did not have many friends. I isolated myself. I was physically sick all the time. I was what was considered a chronically sick child. The doctors really didn't know why. I was diagnosed with allergies and I would get allergy shots, but I would have headaches and upset stomachs. I never wanted to go to school. All I wanted to do was sit home with my grandma and my mom and my grandpa. I felt somewhat safer there, but not, I never felt completely safe because I thought my dad was reading my thoughts. So I stayed chronically sick for many years, avoided school, never liked answering questions in school. If the teacher would call on me, I would say I didn't know the answer just because I couldn't talk in front of people. I was painfully shy. I did not do well in public speaking. I would not go to school on days when I had to give reports. Whenever I was around the age of 12, my biological dad shot himself and he was trying to commit suicide, but it didn't work. He really didn't even get hurt very bad. He did have to have surgery, but it wasn't life-threatening or anything like that. They just had to remove the bullet. And I remember from that moment on, I thought I had known fear prior to that, but I didn't know fear at all because as soon as he shot himself, I knew that if he could hurt himself and he was his favorite person in the entire universe, I had no doubt that he could come kill me or my mom. And so when I was 12 years old, I became suicidal for the first time. I can remember sitting on my bed. My bedroom was upstairs in our house at the time. And I can remember sitting up there and wondering if I could use the blinds, the cord of the blinds to jump out and hang myself. And I never tried it because I thought I would.
If I can interrupt for just a minute, this is
Yeah.
one thing I want the listeners to understand, that her father brought this familiar spirit in there. He tried to commit suicide. So that gives spirits the legal right to mess with her. That gave the spirits the legal right to mess with her and try to get her to do the same thing.
Yeah. And it stayed with me for the majority of my life. I had suicidal ideation constantly, and it would tell me that life would be better if I would just kill myself. My family would be better. I wouldn't be in pain anymore. I never attempted, but I had the thoughts a lot. Also, when I was 12 years old, I started cutting for the first time. I got very depressed, worse than I had been. And my mom and stepdad noticed that something was wrong with me.
Can you tell me a little bit more about cutting? Because I've known some cutters in my life. What is it that it fulfilled in you? Or what is it that, was there an anxiousness that you couldn't get rid of? Or what was the reason that you were cutting yourself?
I think for me, I didn't have the words for it at the age of 12. Looking back, because I did not stop cutting until probably 2019. So from the age of 12 till just a few years ago, I cut. I have scars all over my body from cutting. I think I felt so dead inside because I had shut my emotions off for so long. I wasn't allowed to have emotions because I was so afraid that someone would notice something was wrong. I was fake all the time around my dad, my biological dad. I would plaster a smile on my face, and I just felt dead. And that was the one time I would feel alive. The pain actually felt good. It hurt, but it felt good. It released the emotional pain without me having to say a word. And it was almost like it was I always think about, the old pressure cookers. I don't know if your grandparents ever used them, but my grandma would do canning and she would use a pressure cooker and the little thing would start going off at the top and it would release the steam. That's what it was like for me. It was a release that I couldn't get from anything else. And it was also addictive. Once you start, it's very difficult to stop because it does feel good and it does release. It's a very negative coping skill, but it's effective. And so I carried it for many years of my life. I actually just realized over the last 2 weeks, I've not, this is really random. I've not had a tan since I went through deliverance. And this is the first summer that I've had a tan. And so I can really see my scars a lot. And one on my leg is huge. And I remember doing it, but when I was doing it, I thought it was chaotic. I didn't think it was any type of symbolism. I don't remember thinking anything, but it's actually two horns and it has all-seeing eye on it. And so I know it was 100% demonic led, and I had no idea at the time.
Yeah. So there was nowhere you could run to, no one that you could confide in.
No, because I really believed he could read my mind. So at age 12, I didn't. By that time, I didn't believe that he could read my mind, but I was so terrified of him that I never even considered telling for a long time. When I was 12, I wrote a story in school about a girl who had to go live with her dad and she killed herself. And that was a red flag for my teacher. So I had to start going to therapy. But in therapy, I can't even really remember what all I said, but I know I covered everything up. And they said, oh, there's nothing wrong with her. She's fine. And they didn't catch anything. It wasn't until I was older, around the age of, I think 14, that I disclosed for the first time. I'd went back to therapy and I disclosed to my therapist that I had been sexually abused. I did not give her any details. I didn't talk to her about the occult involvement. I didn't talk about any of that. I just talked about the abuse. But that
Now,
was the first time.
was that story an actual cry for help? Were you hoping that your teachers seen it and gave you that attention and hopefully got you out of that situation?
No, I would have never told. If I knew that that would have got their attention, just in my adolescent mind, I didn't connect the dots that, oh, they're going to read this and think that there's something wrong. It was a fictional character. Of course, it was based on me, but I didn't think that they would pick up on that. It was a way for me to express my emotions, but I thought in like a confidential way where nobody would take notice, but yet I could get some emotions out. I would have never told at that age. I would have, because he had just tried to kill himself. I would have never, ever told because I was horrified. I literally couldn't be in a room with him without visibly shaking. Like my hands would shake. I was so afraid of him, but I would try to cover it up and act like I loved him and that he was the best dad ever. And even minus the abuse, he wasn't the type of abuser that was kind on one, because there's some dads that are super kind and they're loving and they're generous and then they sexually abuse their daughters. He wasn't that way at all. He was very emotionally abusive. He made fun of me all the time. He made jokes about me. He did not want to spend time with me. He had never bought me a Christmas gift, never bought me a birthday gift, made jokes about him not doing it, was very cruel about my mom. He just wasn't a kind person. There was nobody in his life that he was kind to. And so I just feared him all the time and I would have never told. The only reason why I finally told when I was around 14 was I had been in therapy for a while. I think I'd been in therapy for over a year. And my life was falling apart. I was at a very dark place. And I disclosed to her because I didn't think that she would tell anybody. And looking back, she should have reported the abuse. She's a mandated reporter, but she did not. She never reported it to the authorities, and it should have been, but it wasn't.
Well, now as a kid, like us as grown-ups, as you get older, your spiritual eyes are kind of blinded because people will tell you, no, that's crazy, and you gotta get these cultural constructs, and you have to, or social constructs, and you got to live by them. You don't want to seem crazy. You don't want to seem too far over there, too far over there. You always want to line up. Now, do you remember as a kid seeing anything in the spiritual? Did you see ghosts? Did you see anything around or bad spirits while all that occult stuff was going on?
I don't really remember having a time where I didn't at least sense and hear demons. Like back then I thought it was ghost, or I didn't know exactly, like I didn't have a label to put to it. I didn't say, oh, that's a demon. But I always sensed and heard and saw things around me. I would see shadows moving around. My items in my room would get moved around. Like I might go to bed with a piece of jewelry on my finger, like a ring on my finger, and wake up and it be gone. And 2 days later, it'd be sitting on my dresser. I would hear scratching on my walls. I would hear people walking through my bedroom and there was nobody there. There was times I would hear my name being called. I would visibly see things walking through my house. I've seen full blown what look like people walking. I don't remember a time where I didn't hear and see that.
And now knowing what you know, I'm sure you know a lot more about the occult. Do you think it was those times? Do you think it was demons? Do you think it was people from a cult astral projecting or something like that?
I think that it was demonic. I mean, I don't know that my biological dad learned how to astral project. He may have. I actually have never even thought about that question, but now that you ask it, it is possible because I always felt like I was being watched. I definitely think that there was at least record like watching demons to go back and report,
Yeah.
but it could have been astral projection too. He could have been because I always had eyes on me. I from the age of 7, I had 7 years old. I had a sense of eyes were on me 24/7, and so it could have been him. He didn't, he just passed away a few years ago. So it could have.
So around 7 is when he started doing the occult, right? When he
Yes.
Okay, so he might have put some kind of spell and sent some demons on you to always have an eye on you or something.
It's
Okay.
possible.
So you were 14 and you finally confessed to your counselor that this was going on. What happened after that?
After that, looking back, I know so much more now, but she should have reported it. She was a mandated reporter, but she didn't. What she did was sent a letter to my biological dad because he still had visitation at the time. It wasn't set in stone like, oh, I go everywhere. It was basically when I wanted to go, I went. But I always maintained appearances, so I was still going all the time. And he lived with my grandparents at the time. And so she sent a letter to him saying that I just needed some space and that the visits needed to be stopped for a while I worked through some issues. And my grandparents flipped their minds. Like they got so upset. They was very coddling to him. He was like their baby. And he didn't even fight it. He didn't care if he had visitation or not, but they wanted him to have visitation. So they showed up at my house, or my grandpa showed up at my house and said that I should still be seeing my dad. And it was a big mess for a long time. So I ended up just going back around again because I couldn't stand. It was almost like, the old saying, keep your friends close, but your enemies closer, because I always felt like if I was looking like I didn't like him or I wanted to be away from him, that was when he potentially could hurt me because I was never supposed to tell. So if I was going around him and pretending like he was the best dad ever, he would have no reason to hurt me. So I started having visits with him again. But every time I would go over to my grandparents' house, I couldn't sleep. I would have a can of hairspray in case he came in my room at night. I thought, oh, I could spray him in his eyes. But I was always terrified that he was going to try to kill me. I also started getting very sexually active. I started getting sexually active around the age of 13. My body meant absolutely nothing to me. I did not care who I shared it with. I didn't care. I just didn't care. None of it mattered to me. I started attracting the attention of older guys. Like when I was 14, I was having relationships. What I called at the time relationships, looking back now, was not relationships. A 14-year-old cannot consent to a relationship with a 24-year-old man. But that's what I was attracting the attention of 24, 25, 26-year-olds. I was doing a little bit of drinking. I never got too far off into that because I just didn't have access to it. I loved the way I felt when I could get blackout drunk and I couldn't remember or think of anything. Thank the Lord I did not have access to that readily, or it probably would have gotten really bad. The depression got worse.
Kind of new way of cutting, right? Kind of became your new cutting.
Yeah. And I had an eating disorder. I was diagnosed with anorexia at the time. I would starve myself. I just would not eat. It was the one thing I could control. I continued cutting. I was not doing well in school at all. I would never participate. I never turned in homework. I think by the 10th grade or the 11th grade, I only had credits. No, the 10th grade. I only had credits for like one semester of 9th grade. I didn't do anything. I was barely staying alive. So I didn't have much left for anything else in my life.
Now, like you were saying that you felt when you distanced yourself from your dad, that you always ended up going because you felt, bad about it or like you were in danger. Now, in those times when you were away from your dad, did you feel a lot more demonic presence? Did you feel a lot more shadow people and all that type of stuff?
It was all the time. I felt it all the time, regardless if I was around him or not. It followed me, like it stayed with me. Wherever I was at, it was there, because I used to think, oh, every house I go to is like haunted, because back then I didn't understand it was demonic. I thought ghost. I thought, why is it every single house I go to? I would go to my aunt's house. I would see stuff in her house. I would hear stuff. I would go to my grandparents' house. I would hear, and I always would think, well, it's every house I go to. Then I realized at some point in my life, oh, wait, it's me. Like it's following me. And that was a really big realization when it was like, okay, that's why I can't get away from it. It's not the houses that I'm going to, it's me. And so I don't really remember a time where it went away or it got better. Not until I went through deliverance many, many years later. But prior to that, it never went away. No matter where I lived, no matter who I was staying with, it just was always there. It was constant.
Was there any voices? Did you hear voices?
Yeah, all the time.
Several voices?
Mhm.
Did it sound like people you knew, or
No,
no?
no,
Like you wouldn't
no,
hear your dad's voice in your head?
no, I wouldn't hear his voice. I would just hear really mean voices, voices of fear. When I got older, I was diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder. That was in my 20s. And so I accepted some of the voices as me. I thought that they were part of my personality. I thought that DID it used to be called multiple personality disorder. So I thought that they were alters and that they were fragments of my personality. There was like one that presented as a little girl. There was one that presented as a protector that just wanted to protect me. But the problem was it hated everybody around me. And so like those voices, I recognized they were very distinct. I knew their personality and I could feel their emotions. So when they were around, I could feel what they were feeling. Prior
And
to
you
that,
you would embody these spirits and take on their characteristics.
I would allow them, yes.
So
Because
basically,
I was
you turned into that spirit, or you turned into that person.
not totally, no, but I was taught in counseling to integrate with them and to allow them to have a voice because I thought they were part of me.
Wow.
So the idea behind DID is if you go through severe trauma, especially as a child, that parts of you can splinter and you become several different, basically people living in the same body. And the way to have the best case scenario and the most functioning life is to coexist with them. And to coexist with them, you give them a voice. So like I was letting them write through me, like
That is
essentially
crazy.
I
That is
was,
crazy that they're teaching that. They're
and
basically
that was a
telling you to let these demons take over you, and let them have the voice and let them tell you what to do. That is crazy. That's what they're telling people to do.
Yeah, and I mean that's like it's called integration is what it's called. It's integration therapy to allow them a safe space to process their emotions because the idea is that they're you and that's the way you heal from trauma. And so I bought that because by that time I had went to college myself and I had became a therapist. I became a mental health therapist. And so whenever I was taught that, it made sense to me and I fully embraced that. And that was what I did for many years. So I didn't understand that they were demons. I knew there was demons around me. Like I knew I was seeing them. I knew I was hearing them. But what was inside me, I thought was me. I thought it was parts of me. I didn't understand spiritual warfare and I didn't understand that was demons inside of me. I thought they were just around me. And so I thought it was two different things. I thought what was in me was from trauma and it was me. And then what was around me was spiritual warfare and demons because of the occult that I had been exposed to. But I didn't know how to deal with either one of them.
So
And so
because you were exposed to the occult, there was never a time when you were like, "This isn't really happening. It's
no,
all in my head. This is all just make believe." You
no,
always knew.
no, because I visibly seen them. Like I could, and people who lived with me, they would start seeing them too. Like when I got remarried. So I was married at the age of 16 and I stayed married for 6 years. And that was a very violent marriage. When I got out of that and I got remarried, I got remarried in my early 20s. So my husband, I'm still married now. We've been married over 20 years. And he had never experienced anything like that. And by the time he had lived with me for the first 6 months, he started seeing things, hearing things. And he's like, I have never experienced anything like this in my life. And we, at one point, we had lived with my parents because we were all cohabitating together to take care of bills and stuff like that. And they started hearing and seeing things. And they're like, we never do this when we don't live with you. So, I mean, there was no doubt that it was because multiple people, anybody that was around me that lived with me, seen and heard stuff.
Now, now, people that are in the occult and like that's like everyday occurrence. Like me, I know that happens. I've seen stuff like that. So when people talk about that, I know they're seeing something. It's not all make believe. Some people might be kind of crazy and they're just making things up for attention or whatever it may be. But there's people that see that does happen. And did you get a lot of what is it a lot of criticism whenever you tried to talk to people about this,
I
or how
didn't
did
talk.
they? Oh, you didn't talk about it at all.
It was by that time. So I got saved when I was 18 years old. And when I got saved, I got very heavily involved in the church. I loved my church. I loved the community, but it did not teach about spiritual warfare at all. Like there was no teaching about it. The only teaching that I would hear is things like if the demons are messing with you, then you're not standing by faith, or you're not praying hard enough, or you're giving them too much power in your life. But I didn't even know what that meant. Like I didn't even know what all of that meant. So because there wasn't an openness to talk about it, I got the message loud and clear. Oh, they're going to think I'm crazy. So I didn't talk about it. I didn't tell people about it. Like I might tell a few things here and there, like, oh, well, when I was a kid, I saw this, like one little snippet of a story, but I would never tell the extent of it. We didn't talk about it. In my family, like with my parents, we did, and they knew it was very real because they experienced it when they lived with me, or when we all lived together. Even when I was a kid and we lived together, I couldn't sleep in
And
the
by
room
your
by
parents, you mean your mom and her stepdad?
stepdad. Yeah, my mom and stepdad. They got married when I was 12. So he's been like I call him dad. If I talk about the one who abused me, I always call him biological dad, and then the other one. But for this, I'm trying to say stepdad so I don't confuse people. But whenever I was a kid, they would even experience things because when I was in the home, they would experience things. And when, as an adult, when we lived together, like they always did, and it didn't matter where I went, we experienced things. And we all came to the conclusion that it was because I had been introduced to the occult at such a young age that they just recognized me, that wherever I went, demons just recognized me. And so you don't ever get to a place where you accept it, and you never get to a place where you're used to it. I mean, I lived in terror. I couldn't even sleep at night. I would sleep as bright as it is in this room. This is how bright I would try to sleep if I was by myself. I would pile blankets on top of me and just barely poke my eyes out because stuff would get in my face. I would hear things would set on me. I would feel them. I would wake up with bruises, scratches, bite marks, have my, like handprint bruises on my body. So I was terrified, but I didn't know what to do with it. So I just got to the place. I didn't talk about it. I didn't think about it. And I don't ever want to say like, oh, I got used to it, because there is no getting used to it. I mean, there's times my bed would shake all night long. Like somebody was standing there just shaking my bed. It
So
was
there was
horrific.
physical things going on. Well, there was
Absolutely.
items being grabbed and moved and stuff like that you were physically seeing as well.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Lights would come off and on. My door would slam open and shut sometimes. If I was in the car, there was times that the back of my seat would get kicked, like somebody was sitting in the back kicking me. Trying to remember one time my current husband, he was in the bathroom and the whole shower curtain opened. Another time he had let our dogs out, and the door got opened and closed to let them back in. We experienced a lot. There was a lot over the years, and we would see things and hear things. Sometimes we would hear, it was almost like a radio was playing and you couldn't hear the full sound, but you could hear like people talking in the background. That would happen a lot.
And what was the craziest experience?
I'm sorry.
What was the craziest experience?
The craziest. Probably when I would wake up and I had been physically attacked in my sleep. Like I would wake up with bite marks, like legit bite marks that looked like a rat had bit me. And then I would have like scratches in places where I couldn't reach. And I would also have bruises, and like you could see a full handprint bruise, like because I knew that I had been physically attacked. To me, that was the craziest because they were physically attacking my body.
Did you ever try to like just get up and leave somewhere or
No,
run away from? Yeah, because it was following you.
Yeah.
And you knew it was following you.
Yeah. I knew that there was no place to go because from 7 years old, it had always been with me. So I knew like there was no place. I'd lived in multiple places. I had, no, I never tried that because I knew it was with me and I didn't know anything else to do against it.
Now, I know because of pop culture and the stuff we see on TV and stuff like that, we never even thought of going to a Catholic church and trying to find an exorcist or something like that.
No, because I didn't think it was in me. I thought it was around me.
Okay.
I never once considered that anything was in me or attached to me. Even after I got saved, like it never ever once until 2019 never dawned on me that it was attached to me and that I was opening doors to it. Like I never understood that I was doing things in my life that was allowing it to stay. I never understood anything about generational curses, word curses, ungodly soul ties. I watched horror movies. Like that was a huge open door. I was participating in witchcraft by some of the movies I was watching and allowing in my home. And I didn't understand any of that. So I never sought help for it. I never talked about it. I accepted it to the extent of, well, this is my life and I don't know what else to do. So I guess this is just what I have to deal with because of what I went through as a kid. And I was also very physically and mentally sick. I had very hefty mental diagnosis. So most of the days I didn't even have the energy to even think about it. It just what kind of like it is what it is. That's kind of where I got to because I just didn't have the capacity to do anything about it. I was very, very sick physically and
Now,
mentally.
now for some of my listeners that don't know anything about this, so some
Mhm.
people they've lived, you know, very simple lives. I'm not saying it like that, but you know, they've never been exposed to anything like this, and they don't know anything about what you're talking about. Can you explain some of these things like soul ties or generational curses?
Sure. I would kind of like to move forward a little bit as we do, and I definitely will hit that. So whenever my life went on like that for years, years and years. And in the church, I stayed active. I was going to Bible study. I was doing all those things, and I was praying for healing. Like I felt like my body needed to be healed. I needed mental illness. Just I looked at mental illness as the same way I would heart disease, and I just needed healing, is what I thought.
Were you
And
on medication?
different times I was, yes. Yeah. I was on very heavy antidepressants. And at times I went also on anti-anxiety medication. I
Did
never
they
went
help at
on,
all?
no, it did absolutely nothing. It did numb me, like I would be numb, like I couldn't feel. And it didn't help. Like they would max out the dosage and it didn't do anything other than numb me at points, but not enough. Like it, no, it didn't help. And so I was in and out of therapy over the years as well. And I continued to love God and I continued to pray, but there was also a wall up between God and I because I didn't understand why I wasn't getting healed. I didn't understand why I wasn't walking in any level of victory whatsoever in my life. And I had unforgiveness in my heart toward the abusers in my life. I thought I had forgiven. I wanted to forgive, but there were things that I just hadn't let go of. And by 2019, my life was a mess. I was physically very, very sick. I was going back and forth to the Mayo Clinic. I had something going on with my lungs that they really couldn't diagnose. They wasn't sure exactly what it was. It looked like asthma, but it wasn't exactly asthma. Every time I would try to talk, I would start coughing profusely and I couldn't even have a conversation. I would have to take inhalers because I felt like I couldn't breathe. I also had a list of diagnosis a mile long. I'd been to over 30 specialists and I was just getting worse. I had one doctor tell me that no matter what they tried, it felt like my body just had a blockage and it wouldn't accept any treatment. And they didn't understand why. They didn't know what to do with that. Mentally, I was fighting depression all the time. I had suicidal ideation daily. I have been diagnosed with PTSD, clinical depression, and then the DID and OCD. And I had all of the things just thrown at me, and I wasn't getting better. I was getting worse and worse and worse. And around that time, my son, who was an adult by that time, he messaged me and he said, "Hey, Mom, I think that there's this minister you should listen to." I said, "Okay, send me a link." And he did. And I listened to about 5 minutes in, and I heard the word deliverance for the very first time. I'd never even heard of deliverance
What
ministry.
minister?
I'm sorry.
What minister? What minister was this?
It was Isaiah Saldivar,
Oh, okay, yeah.
which I'm not promoting or anything like that. But at the time, when I listened to the video, he had talked about deliverance for the very first time. And I'm like, as soon as he said that, and he talked about how Christians can open doors to demons in our lives, through different things that we do and trauma and generational things, and have the need to have them cast out. I knew in my spirit. It was like my spirit just was jumping. I'm like, that's me. That's exactly that's what's going on with me. And I didn't know all the details. I didn't know anything about any of these words. I didn't even understand really what he was saying, but I knew it was me. And so I reached out to him. That was before he got super popular. He didn't have this platform like he has now. It was prior to that. And I reached out to him and I asked him, was there any resources that he thought that, would be helpful? And he recommended Derek Prince, They Shall Expel Demons, and Don Dickerman, Keeping the Pig, or When Pigs Move In, or something about pigs.
Yeah, Don, he's good.
Yeah, I like both of them. And so I bought the books and then I set them to the side. And I really honestly can't tell you what happened in that year. I lost a year. I don't know what happened. I know I got sicker and sicker. And I was seeing a friend, she does inner healing ministry. And we would go and pray. And she started teaching me about generational curses. So we went to the Old Testament where it talks about how when you sin, God will visit it up to the third generation. I didn't understand any of that. And I always thought, well, when you get saved, like that cleanses everything and that just breaks everything. But she really taught me about how that, yes, everything is done at the cross. It's through the blood of Jesus, through the power of Jesus. We ask for those generational curses to be broken and those generational curses to not operate in our life anymore. She also talked to me about word curses, about how we have the power of life and death in our tongue. When we speak negatively or we speak death over our lives, that gives demons power to bring those things to fruition in our life. So like whenever I would say things like, this is going to kill me, or I may not live, or there's no cure, I'm never going to get better, like that was giving that life. And we really have to watch what we speak. And I didn't understand the power of my words prior to that. We also started talking about ungodly soul ties. In the Bible, it talks about Jonathan and David in the Old Testament. They were knit together. Their souls were knit together. And that was for a godly purpose. And it also talks about how as husband and wife, when you have intercourse, you become one and you become one with that person. So when you have these ungodly soul ties that are not from God, but they're from the enemy, and you become one with a person, you're sharing their demons. So whoever you're sleeping with outside of marriage, or even if it's an abuse situation, or if there's domination, manipulation, and control, there can be ungodly soul ties that need to be broken, and whatever's in you from that person needs to be sent back. So as she was teaching me these things, I started cleaning my house out, and she started teaching me about how God says no witchcraft. It doesn't say, well, if it's for entertainment purposes, it's not a big deal. God says no witchcraft, no occultism, no paganism, no necromancy, nothing to do with witchcraft for his children. And by allowing it to come in and me labeling it as entertainment, I was allowing movies, books, magazines to be in my home that were full of witchcraft, because I thought they were just innocent entertainment, like Harry Potter and Twilight. Back then, Twilight was really popular. I read the books over and over. We watched, my husband and I at one time had over 350 horror movies. Like we collected them.
And I might be dating myself, but a lot of us, like I was born in '83. So people from my generation growing up, we kind of indoctrinated ourselves. A lot of us were raised on this the show Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Yep.
And watching Goosebumps or reading Goosebumps. I remember being a little kid and everybody wanted to read the newest Goosebumps about all these junior horror novels.
Yep. It's everywhere. And I mean, kids are just flooded with it. And it's like it normalizes it. Like, oh, it's no big deal. It's just for fun. And so I got rid of, we took trash bags and trash bags out. And, here I am thinking, oh, I'm living a godly life. And I'm like, when I realized all the doors I had opened in my life. But as I was trying to go to her, I kept getting sicker and sicker. Like I could not physically go to see her anymore at all. So that stopped. I'd set the books aside. And then that brings us to around 2020. Well, it brings us to 2020. And I felt like the Lord was saying, set aside a week for fasting and prayer for healing. And I said, okay, God, I'll do that. I'll do anything. And in that week, he really started taking me to a place of deep, deep cleansing. When I got saved, I did the repeat after me prayer and with the pastor, and I repeated after him, and I was sorry for my sin. I was sorry that I had hurt God and those things, but this was different. This was like a deep, deep level. Like he showed me how I had allowed the abuse to cause me to be emotionally abusive to the people around me. And I excused it with, well, what I've been through, my life has been so hard, and I had a huge pity party for myself. That was my life. I wrapped myself in pity. He showed me how I had allowed so many lies to attach to my identity that was never from him. He also took me through the process of letting go of needing to know why. I always held on to the question of, God, I know you can do anything. Like I never doubted God's power. I never doubted who he was, but I always wanted to know why bad things happen, especially to kids. And I felt like if he would just tell me that, then I could heal and I could move forward. And I never got a solid answer. Like I had, the answers like, well, we live in a fallen world and everybody has free will, but it just never set with me because I always read the Bible and I seen where God did these huge miracles. And I would always think, well, God, if you did it for them, but you didn't me, then something must be wrong with me. You must not love me as much. And so I wrestled with that question. And he showed me a vision that week. And it was like two paths. And I could continue on the path I was on, and my life would stay the same. And I would have a death grip on that question. And I could continue being exactly who I was, or I could release it and I could choose to walk by faith like the Bible tells us to. But that would mean laying it down and never picking it up again. And by laying it down, that meant I would never need to question him again. I would have to release the need to know. It wasn't just about, oh, I'm not going to ask. It was, I'm going to release the need to know. And so I wrestled with that for a while because it was really difficult because I felt like I needed that answer so bad. But I did. I released it and I told God, I will never ask again and I won't even need to know. And in that time, he flipped it. Like I used to view God through the lens of my abuse. And he showed me that. And now I view God through the lens of his word. And I view the abuse through the lens of his word, not the opposite. I was living in the opposite because I allowed the enemy to twist who God is. And I look at God now for who he says he is in his word. And that's the truth. He also told me to call my mom and stepdad and ask them to come over and pray for me. And I said, oh, but Lord, they live 2 hours away. Will you tell them? And so a few minutes later, my mom messaged me and she said, your dad and I feel like we need to come over and pray for you. And I was like, yeah, I think so too.
Wow.
And so, yeah, it was so cool. And I knew that deliverance was going to be part of it. But at that time, I didn't know if maybe I had one demon, maybe I had two, and then I had mental illness, and then I had all this physical. Like I didn't know what was what. So I had been messaging my parents with some of the stuff I was learning, and I sent them a few videos because we didn't come up around none of this stuff.
So how did it come up for them? She just got a thought in her mind out of nowhere? I got to go pray for her, or?
Yeah. Yeah, she just felt like the Lord was telling her, she recognizes God's voice. And whenever she felt it, she was like, oh, God's saying we need to come pray for you. And so I was like, yeah. And then I had told her what had happened. Definitely confirmation. And so I had sent them like just a small outline of one of the books. I don't know if it was Don Dickerman's or Derek Prince of This Is How You Cast Demons Out, because we'd never been around any of this stuff. Mind you, we'd been in church. We had been in spirit-filled churches that believed in healing and all, but we had never been around spirit, like teaching about spiritual warfare, nothing.
Yeah, it's kind of shunned on.
I'm sorry.
It's kind of shunned on, like everybody. Oh, that's a crazy new stuff that people are doing. They're or too far Pentecostal.
Yep, for sure, absolutely. And so they came over, and we knew my dad was going to be leading it. He carries a heavy, heavy anointing. And I knew it was going to be him. And so they came over, and immediately, as soon as they walked in the door, I felt hatred toward my dad. And I felt in me that I wanted to physically attack him. Like I had to hold my body back because my body wanted to claw his eyes out. And I have never had anything but love and respect for my stepdad. Like I would not feel those things toward him, but I could feel it inside me. And so we started praying, and it took about 4.5 hours, and between probably 45 and 65 demons were cast out. We don't know exactly how many because sometimes multiple ones would come out at once.
Now,
Those are the
how do you know it was that many? Were you asking their names,
yes.
or you could see them?
Sometimes my dad would be led to ask their name. Other times I felt which one it was, because here was the thing, like up until that point, I still didn't know that the altars were demons. I thought they were still part of me. I thought that they were part of my personality, and I wanted God to heal and make me one and make me whole. I had no idea up until that moment that every single altar that I had accepted as me was actually a demon. And when it would come, like when it was being cast out, I would feel its emotions. So, and that's how I could recognize them, because I knew how that, like by that time I'd lived with them for so many years. I would talk to them. I would let them write through me. I would let them speak through me. I would let them be present through me. And so when one was there, I would know exactly who it was based on its emotions and based on what it was saying and based on its voice. And there was one my dad was trying and trying to cast out, and it wouldn't go. And the Lord spoke to me and said, you have to break identity with it because you've accepted it as yourself. And so I had to verbally say, you're not part of me. You don't belong to me. You're a demon and you have to leave. And and I don't want you and I don't need you. And as soon as I said that, then my dad was able to cast it out. There was a mocking spirit that started mocking him and laughing at him. There was one that spoke through me and said that it made me fat. It said, I make her eat. At that point, I was almost 300 pounds. It said, I make her eat and eat and eat, and she's never full. And it just would cackle and laugh. And God had led me, I had a sugar addiction, severe, severe sugar addiction. And several days prior to the deliverance, God told me no more sugar. He said, stop eating like candy. Like, I mean, I would still have it in some condiments and stuff like that, but candy, pop, cake, all of that, stop eating it. And I said, okay. And I did. And I knew that was, looking back, I knew that was to be able to break the hold that that demon had on me because of the addiction. So I knew that when that came out. There was one of the last ones, the hardest one to get out, that took the longest. It said that I had been dedicated to it through a blood ritual by my biological dad, and that I belonged to it, and it was not letting go. It was a very difficult one to cast out. It was the most difficult. And when that happened, we didn't know much back then. And I started punching myself. I started hitting myself in the head, and I was pulling my hair out. And at one point I felt
And
a
you
hand.
never done that before?
No, not like that. No. And at one point I felt a hand choking me and I couldn't breathe. And I whispered, I can't breathe. And then my dad commanded it to let go of my neck. And immediately it did. I spit on him from across the room, which was physically impossible because of the distance. But it landed right on his face. I tried to pick up a trash can and throw at him, but it just landed straight in front of me. It was like there was something standing there stopping it and wouldn't allow it. I couldn't get up out of my seat. I wanted to get up and physically attack him, but I was held in my seat because we didn't know any of that. So we didn't know to bind all of that prior to the session. I mean, of course, now I know to do that. But back then I didn't know that. And I pulled some of my hair out. It got really intense before they was able to verbally command that to stop. It was a very, very, there was vomiting, spitting, screaming, yelling. The last one to go, it was the strong man, and the one that I had been dedicated to. And it felt extreme ownership of me. And I recognized that one as the one that was my protector, that it wasn't, but that's what it presented as. But it hated everybody in my life. It always talked bad about everybody and said that everybody was out to get me. So when it was done, we kind of just sat on the couch and kind of stared at each other like, what just happened? Like, what just happened? And they had to go back to their house. They lived almost 2 hours away.
What was
And
your husband in all this?
he was at work. He wasn't home. I did not have a good relationship.
Did he know about he at the time he didn't know this was going on?
He did. He knew that we was going to get together and pray. But we did not have a good relationship. He was basically my caregiver at that point. The demons in me hated him. And he just recently told me, like he like over this past week, because I mean, we're very close now. God restored our marriage 100%. We have a beautiful relationship. And I never thought it was possible. But he recently told me that he used to sleep with one eye open because there was times I would sleep with knives under the bed, and he would be scared because he said I used to tell him I was going to kill him. Like a different voice would come and say, "Keep it up, I'll kill you." And he really believed that I could. Like he was afraid that I would try to kill him in his sleep. And I do
You might
remember.
have. Not to say that you would have, but you might have been taken over by a demon or something. Yeah.
Well, and I would have visions of killing him. Like what he's saying is accurate because I would have visions of stabbing him. Like in my mind, I would see it like a television program, but I could see it in my mind of me stabbing him. And they was always trying to get me to do that. Always
And
trying to.
were you thinking it was your thoughts that you wanted to do that?
No, I thought it was one of the altars that hated him. Like I thought it was just one of them that hated him and that I would never do it. But and this is the thing too that people don't understand. I was a Christian during all this. I was not like I was a Christian, but I gave them control because I thought they were me. It wasn't that they were able to possess me, that they weren't able to just take over. They couldn't just move in and do whatever they wanted. I gave them control because I thought they were me. I let them speak through me. I let them express themselves. I let them, like I was channeling demons. I was writing. I was letting them write, use my hands to write. I let them cut my body. I allowed them all of that leeway because I thought they were me. It was a lie. They weren't me, but I gave them permission. And they would always, always, always try to get me to give them the driver's seat. They would want me to step back and let them take over. And I would never let them fully take over, but I gave them a lot. It's not everybody that has a case like mine. I mean, it's not everybody that has went through the ritualistic abuse and those things either. And that opens up a lot of doors. So, if you're hearing this and you're like, oh, well, that's not me. Well, you could still need deliverance, but